back to the pandemic that has changed life in so many ways. There's the news about possible treatments, but the best way to treat perhaps this pandemic and this virus is to avoid it. And you do that with testing. Major news today. And we invite in the CEO of Fluidigm, Chris Linthwaite, to talk about emergency use authorization, which has been granted by the Food and Drug Administration to Fluidigm's rapid and inexpensive coronavirus test. I'm not a scientist or a biochemist. Help me understand in layman's terms what your test does and how this is a game changer.
Hi, Adam. Yes, for certain. Thanks very much for including us on the program today. Yes, the Advanta Dx product, which Fluidigm has recently commercialized and received emergency use authorization for in August, is really, I think, a critical part of the arsenal for how we need to get back to work, return to school, and get the economy back on its feet. One of the key things we announced this morning relates to our Campus Safeguard program. And so the intent of the Campus Safeguard program is to address more than 20 million in higher education that are really struggling right now to deploy a scalable and affordable testing program for the safety of their population.
Hi, Chris. Anjalee here. Wanted to know a little bit more about, there's so much focus on the purpose of testing and whether or not it's really useful. We saw that what happened in the White House was a result of solely relying on testing. So what can you say about that and the role that it will play and can play with colleges, especially when they can't really do much about anything else, like dormitories and other, close spaces?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think there's no one strategy here alone. You need to attack it from many different dimensions, and there's a couple different ways to talk about it. So on the one hand, not all tests are created equal, and so many places have been deploying antigen-based testing, partially because it was affordable and slightly more available, when the gold standard is really PCR. And one of the inhibitors for PCR had been the perception that it was too expensive and difficult to deploy. And so programs or companies like Fluidigm have been dramatically scaling our manufacturing capability to meet this emerging need. And so, for instance, we successfully received a grant from the NIH to dramatically expand manufacturing capacity, $34 million, which is part of what's enabled us to provide millions of additional tests to deploy on these campuses. So as the schools are tackling these different programs, one, they have to make sure they have the right test for the right environment. And it's really critical to have a frequency of testing. Most programs, most schools have taken a single testing strategy. They'll test once before they arrive. Maybe they test once after they arrive. Then they test maybe a couple times while the students are there, or they do sampling programs. And that's really a function of affordability, not exactly the great science. So what part of what industry is attempting to do here is to get those tests available in the sufficient quantities that are required in the right place in order to allow our students to go back to their regular work and to keep the faculty safe. And so I think the universities and the colleges are approaching it reasonably well, the best they can in closed quarters. But when coupled with ubiquitous testing, then they really have a much stronger combination of safety to put in place.
Chris, it's Julie here. Are you going to make money on these tests? I mean, I know this has been a big public health crisis, and so there has been talk about offering certain products for free, vaccines, for example. So are you selling these to universities at cost, and then what's your cost base?
I mean, part of the benefit of this program from the NIH and the expansion, and this was a very major investment. So they've committed more than, I think, $1.6 billion to invest in next generation and advanced technologies. And part of that money was earmarked to drive scale up and to do things in an industry we wouldn't otherwise, without a very clear demand curve or demand signal, to expand our capacity, say 12-fold or 24-fold. This is a massive investment normally that we'd have to therefore recoup through more aggressive pricing strategies. So the government's really stepped in here and allowed to subsidize some of this manufacturing capacity. And the subsidies allowed us for specific target groups to provide these tests at an attractive price that they can afford to deploy at massive scale. So yes, we're certainly in the business of making money, and we need to make some money here to reinvest in the next generation technologies. We certainly should benefit from the intellectual property that we've built and the differentiation of this unique microfluidics-based technology. And we really do see it as a springboard for transforming the diagnostics industry, the way that we can miniaturize tests and flexibly address everything from influenza and flu, the next pandemic, to miniaturizing these and integrating them to make them very simple cartridges. We're going through a Manhattan project of innovation, and we're going to need to continue to invest in that innovation. So I think it's appropriate. This is a business, it's a commercial enterprise, but part of what the government stepping in has allowed us to be more flexible for some segments of the market to address those needs in underserved markets like the education segment that are really struggling because they have to do private pay. And so it's not so much about optimizing profits for us. It's more about making sure that we get these tests out to the places that they're needed for the people who can afford them.
Chris, I got to go quickly off topic with you because the stock is under pressure right now. It's off about almost 4%. And it broke today. There's this lawsuit seeking class action status against the company for things that happened before the pandemic. Do you want to respond to this? Because it does seem to be having a negative effect on a day when you should be getting some positive headlines.
Well, I think, as you well know, Adam, that these are almost like a rite of passage now. These are a serial set of activities that every company deals with at some point. From our perspective, these are all marketing campaigns. So these are, legal law firms that are filing essentially the same question over and over again in the efforts to attract shareholders. From at least the last few I've seen, they're representing, say, 15 shares or 55 shares. I mean, it's really a trivial activity that unfortunately just drives insurance premiums and drives the need for us to look at this from a tort reform and from a securities perspective. These are baseless in our perspective, and it's something that we'll address in due time appropriately through the courts.
Hey investors, Zach Guzman here. Are you interested in learning more about the markets and getting the latest financial news? Well, then click right here to subscribe to our Yahoo Finance YouTube channel. Get the latest up-to-the-minute market analysis, big interviews in the world of finance, and information on how to manage your money every day wherever you are.